Thank you for joining us. My name is Robert Straw. I'm the CEO of the Zurich campus of CEIBS, and I'm based in Zurich, Switzerland. And I'm so glad to have you here today in today's webinar. This is the 7th webinar of our series. The webinar series is called Lessons from Leaders from the Pandemic Crisis. We had a discussion earlier in the week that we're actually going to be continuing this throughout the year because the resonance from business leaders around the globe has been so strong. Today we're partnering with Kuehne and Nagel and with the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. So thank you very much to both of you, organizations and firms, for partnering with us. Today's topic is overcoming the impact of COVID-19 on global supply chains, responsiveness, resilience, and restoration. As we began to think about this, I thought and talked with some of the people around me, where does the food come from that we get in the stores and the petrol from the gas station and so forth? And most of us take this for granted globally. It just happens. Well, that's a good sign for the experts that we have. It means that they're doing their job very, very well, that the global supply chain usually works fantastic until a crisis. So today's topic is to look at exactly that. What are we learning from this? How are we responding? How resilient are we? And how do we restore in the way forward? Before we go into the contents, I'd like to tell you a little bit, very briefly, about CEIBS. Not everyone on the call knows about CEIBS. If I could see the slide on CEIBS, please. Great, thanks. CEIBS, the China-Europe International Business School, is a 25-year-old institution headquartered in Shanghai. On the bottom right, you can see that we've got campuses around the globe. We've got in Shanghai, campuses in Beijing and in Shenzhen. We have a Zurich campus that's responsible for the European operations, and we have a campus in Accra, Ghana, that's responsible for all of the African connection. What do? We run MBA programs, executive programs. We have a global EMBA, a finance EMBA, a hospitality MBA, and we run executive education programs around the world for firms. We're fortunate enough to be ranked very high by the Financial Times in the last couple of years. Our MBA program in particular and our global EMBA program are ranked number 5 in the world for the 2nd year in a row. So we're very humbled and very thankful to be in this global ranking. It's providing us with a lot of limelight and putting a lot of pressure on us to continue the focus on quality. We're the number 1 business school in mainland China, and we were the first school to receive both the EQUIS and the AACSB accreditation for the work that we're doing. We have about 70 full-time professors working for us in our global campuses around the world. And lastly, I just would like to mention that our alumni, so the way in and the way out is through the alumni. We have about 25,000 people in our alumni association globally, and this is a huge asset for us for building cases and doing our teaching and doing our executive education and recruitment and placement. So we're very thankful. I know many of the alumni are on the line today. We have about 100 people now. I expect that to grow. So thank you for joining us. Due to the popular demand of these webinars, as I mentioned, we're going to continue them. We're going to continue some of these in June and July. Topics will include subjects such as leadership comparisons between SMEs and multinationals during a crisis. An SME where the owner and possibly the manager, the CEO knows all the staff is quite different than a global corporation that has a footprint in maybe 100 or 120 countries. It's a different way to manage. We're going to be looking at healthcare. We're going to be looking at risk, at service, at luxury branding, and the future of internationalization. As we will see, and I think this will be some of the lessons learned from today, the future of internationalization is quite impacted by, and the global supply chain is affected by the crisis. We ask you to feel free to be in touch with us. You can use the chat function or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to give us some inputs on how to improve the series or ideas for new webinars, please use the chat function. If you would like to ask a question to either one of the leaders who are going to be speaking today, I ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom. That's the one that we're going to look at. Throughout the time, before we start, I'd like to launch a little poll. I'd like to ask you a question. You're here because you've got an interest in global supply chains and the way forward and the lessons learned, but also we would like to know more about China. We know many of you are China fans, and our school is known for being a bridge from the world into China and from China to the world. And so as we're developing new programs and new webinars, we'd like to ask you the poll of what are your 3 main areas of interest in learning more about Chinese business. So just spend a second and give an answer there. You can click up to 3 ideas. Great, I'm just gonna wait about 25 seconds. So we only have a few people actually taking part in the poll so far. So let's try it again. Yeah, so we've got some people beginning to click on this, on their ideas. Thank you. Oh, quite interesting. We're going to show the poll in just a minute, the results. We'll reveal them with you. Anand Krishnan, to all panelists, please show the poll again. It should be up on your screen, Anand. If not, you can just send us a chat telling us what topics you feel like are important. We have about 70 people who have answered the question so far out of the 102 online. We're not, I see some of you raising your hands. We're not going to entertain questions during the seminar, during the webinar right now. We're going to do that during the Q&A. So hold your questions, or you can write them in the Q&A section. So what we see is, if you can stop sharing and share the poll. So we see new business models. Wow, that's great. So that's something that we've been talking about too. New business models going forward. So 31 of you said that you would like new business models. How and where to do business in China. It's a huge country. There's a myriad, and the cultural differences are quite different than in Europe. Most of the people here on the call are from Europe. How do we do this? From a cultural standpoint, from a legal standpoint, financial standpoint, managerial standpoint? I like that topic a lot. And then e-commerce. Our school has a deep expertise in new retail, anything going online. And in fact, China has definitely the lead in e-commerce globally. So thank you very much for those polls. We will take those into considerations. I'd like now to introduce very briefly our speakers. Our very own Professor Zhao is a CEIBS Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management. He spent his life focusing on this topic as an expert, as an academic, and as a consultant to many, many firms around the globe. He focuses on business model innovation out of supply chain management. He focuses on supply chain finance, digital supply chains, and supply chain optimization using big data. He's also, we're very proud that he's the founder and honorable president of the Association of Supply Chain and Operations Management, ASCOM. As typical with these webinars, we have one of our academic speakers speak and give their inputs based on really years and years of research and experience, coaching and advising in the area. And we couple that with an expert from industry. Today, we're very thankful to have Martin Schaefer with us. Martin Schaefer is Vice President for Air Operations Europe at Kuehne and Nagel. Kuehne and Nagel is one of the world's leading transportation companies. Martin has been working for them for 17 years in many different functions in North America, Middle East, and now Europe. In his current role, as I said, he's the Vice President for Air Logistics Operations in Europe, and his focus is on organizational transformation. So already you see the link between why we have these two gentlemen speaking today. And he also looks at the underlying systems, such as underlying areas such as systems, process, training, as well as implementation. So to both of you, thanks very much. After we have heard from Professor Zhao and Martin, we would welcome Sally Yan. Sally is on the executive board member of Drive Tide Capital. She has a lot of experience in medical equipment manufacturing and therefore import-export and in affecting the global supply chain. The challenges and innovations around this area are particularly useful right now. And finally, we'll hear from Felix Soto. Felix is on the board, on an advisory board of CEIBS Europe. We work very closely together with him. He's also on the president of the Swiss-Chinese Chamber of Commerce. We could list all of the accolades that he's acquired, but Felix and Sally will be at the very end of the two speakers. After the speakers speak, they will be asked to give a commentary or an insight for 2 or 3 minutes. Professor Zhao, I give the floor to you. Thank you very much for joining us. You have to unmute. You're
everybody.
Welcome. Thank you.
Everybody.
Yes.
Let me try to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
But my presentation seems to be ended already.
Yeah.
I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to talk about supply challenges under COVID-19 and also some of the innovative strategies and practice as I see from Chinese companies. In the next 15 minutes, I'll first briefly go through the supply chain challenge under COVID-19 on both the demand and supply sides. I will also briefly describe some supply chain management practices as I've observed from Chinese companies. And then I'm going to discuss the ongoing ripple effects in global supply chains. Towards the end, I'll try to make some suggestions as to how you can really improve supply chain capabilities, not only to deal with a crisis like COVID-19, it will also allow you to be able to gain competitive advantage in the global marketplace. And through some research and discussions, and we termed the capability as the 3 R's. That includes responsiveness, resilience, and restoration. First, according to a survey conducted by the World Economic Forum, most executives believe that COVID-19 has really created huge challenge for supply chain executives on the both demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, due to COVID-19, the demand for certain products such as the medical supplies and equipment has increased dramatically. Things like a mask, according to certain estimate, the demand during this crisis is like 100 times of the normal demand. So meeting the hugely increased demand is a huge challenge. At the same time, all of us who needs to eat need to use our daily necessary items in order to live. But somehow, due to this virus, we cannot go to store, we cannot go to the restaurant anymore. So there's a huge shift of demand from the offline channel to the online channel. So this is another huge challenge. And then on the supply side, due to the government control of the movement of the people, and also the transportation like air and sometimes even rail or even road transportation, that really create disruption on the supply side. And according to some surveys, many factories until today still cannot really resume operations. And these type of disruptions certainly will influence the entire supply chain operation. As you can see from this chart, over 52% of the survey respondents indicated the COVID-19 has really very high impact on the demand side and also on the supply side. On the demand side, 52% gave a rating of 8 to 10, and then about 44% gave a rating of 8 to 10 on the supply side. So apparently people believe COVID-19 has interrupted the demand side more than even the supply side. In China, we got the COVID-19 a little bit earlier than the rest of the world. And in February, it was really a very, very bad month. And the PMI in February was 35.7%, historical low. And then through concerted effort by the government and the business enterprises, in March, the PMI restored to the level of 52%. As of April 14th, the average return to work rate of enterprises above certain designated sites is 99%. That's really a very high rate. And then for the small and medium-sized enterprise, the return to work rate is 84%. And Wuhan, after 76 days of lockdown, they were returned to being unlocked on April 8th. And then on the US and Europe, I think the situation now is even more unstable, and in certain countries, the situation is very serious. And IMF is estimating the US GDP growth will be negative 5.9%, and the EU growth will be negative 7.1%. Both are really the largest negative increase in history. And the US unemployment rate in April was 14.7%, and it's estimated to reach a historical high of 25%, which is really devastating for the people who really need to make a living. So with these terrible economic situations, as a supply chain professor or as a supply chain professional, the question we should ask is, what can we do to contribute to resolving these difficult situations, and also help to really with people's living and help with people's life protection. And over the past period of several months, I've been observing many businesses in China, and they have done many innovative practices in the supply chain area. And many of these practices are really enabled by digital technology, big data analytics, and supply chain collaborations. And these innovations can be classified into these 6 areas. One is demand forecasting. If you can use multiple sources of data, things like real-time infection status of cities and districts, and the moving line of the infected persons, you will be able to better forecast the demand for, let's say, the medical supply and the equipment. And another very important aspect is, certain products are in shortage. Will you be able to source globally? During February, actually, many of my friends who are in the supply chain business, they use their global network of sourcing to source things like masks, like protective clothes. And they also use their expertise for international logistics and customs to handle all these logistics so that the Chinese people will be able to get their supply to use them to protect themselves. And then later on, you'll find the demand in other countries is increasing, and then many firms are helping to do the sourcing from China to foreign countries. In addition to that, manufacturers shows amazing flexibility. And some of them will have to really increase the volume rapidly. Some of them will have to change their product specification. And some of them even change from producing auto parts, garments, into producing things like masks and inhibitors. And that's really a very important part of supply chain flexibility. Then the next area, you need to be able to use information to match the supply and demand. And the next area is when you do not have enough supply, you will have to really use data to rank the importance of different people who need the product so that you will be able to better allocate the product so that you can really have better result of control. And then the last area is warehousing and the delivery. So these are the major things we need to do in logistics. And many of the times you're going to find if you have digital technology, you have big data, if you can use these modern technology and data to help you to optimize the decision, at the same time, you are able to align the partners to really result in closer collaboration, then you will be able to solve the problem better. So one company which did extremely well is Jingdong Logistics. So over the years, they invested a lot of resources into digital supply chain, into supply chain optimization using big data. So using their capability, they worked with the Hubei government from the Emergency Supply Chain Management Center. They were able to use their system to visualize where are the supply, where are the demand, and then they use their expertise to optimize inventory decisions, optimize the transportation and allocation decisions, so that in the end, with the help of Jingdong Logistics, Hubei government is able to manage a system which allow most people who are really in need of these type of products will be able to get these products. Another company that we are very proud of is Meituan. They are in the business of using internet and modern technology to connect the restaurant with the consumer. During the normal times, consumer can search restaurant information, decide which one you want to go to, and then they make the bookings through the internet platform. And the next company also developed the home delivery system. So they are the largest provider of home delivery services. And during this COVID-19, they were very innovative to do contactless delivery by using unmanned delivery vehicles and also smart lockers for pickups. At the same time, over the years, they have developed the IT solutions for restaurants, for the convenience stores, and also for the central kitchen, and also for the food suppliers. Since many of these companies are using this company's information system, so naturally, Meituan knows where the supply, where their production capacity, so they were able to use the information from upstream and downstream to maximize the efficiency of the supply chain so that many of us can stay home, be able to get good food and meal to really make us comfortable at home. Now, let's look at the ongoing ripple effect. This is a very complex issue. I will not have enough time to discuss this in 15 minutes, but when first the Chinese factory was shut down, as I mentioned before, the PMI was historically low, 35.7%. Many of these Chinese factories cannot really produce products, but many of these Chinese factories, they are exporting to overseas and they are supplying the raw material and the parts or intermediate product to foreign factories. And due to the stoppage of the Chinese factory, many of these overseas factories do not really have their supply. And that's really a major disruption to the global supply chain. And then when the overseas factory do not have the Chinese supply, maybe for the whole product, only one part is missing. Then they cannot really produce their product. And then in turn, they cannot really supply the Chinese factories. So Chinese factories after the Chinese New Year, after they tried very hard to resume their operation, then they found the critical components from overseas cannot come in. And then that caused the second wave of trouble in the Chinese factory. And then later on in April, in March, more and more Europe and the US countries are having more and more cases. And the government start to control the factory and the people and also the logistic movement. As a result, you created a ripple effect where the companies in Asia, Europe, North America start to negatively influence each other. As you can see here, this is a very, very complex issue. To solve these problems, we need to enhance supply chain capabilities. But normally, when we talk about supply chain capabilities, we often focus on cost and quality. But during this crisis, we start to realize the ability of the supply chain to plan for, respond to, and also recover from disruptions in a timely and costly effective manner is very, very important. In order to enhance this ability, first, you need to be able to respond quickly and accurately to the fast-changing customer demand and market needs. During regular times, we also need this capability, but during this crisis, you're going to find the demand for certain items jump up 100 times within a day or two. Can you respond to that? And in addition to that, due to the needs to protect people, you also need to produce new products. Can you change the production capacity so that you will be able to produce new products? This is all part of the responsiveness. Then the second R is resilience, which refers to the ability to ensure a continuity of supply chain operations and also recover quickly from the disruptions caused by these external disasters. So you see certain companies, after a certain transportation link was knocked down, they were able to find alternatives and they can still do the transportation. After certain suppliers cannot really support them, they can find an alternative supplier. This is all signs of resilience. Then the third R is what we call restoration. It really has two dimensions. One is the ability to restart supply chain after complete stops. After the Chinese New Year, many companies faced this issue in China. And then the other dimension is to redesign or reconfigure a new supply chain to meet the new demands. And during this crisis, many companies tried very hard to reconfigure their supply chain so that they will be able to produce products that are badly needed. One company we studied is Xiande. As you know, Xiande is a huge conglomerate manufacturer. They produce all kinds of electrical appliances. During the peacetime, when it is normal, they actually worked very hard to improve flexibility by redesigning their products into different modules. They also redesigned their process into different modules. They also did the so-called modular purchasing. And then they also set up a Cosmos platform to connect the modular suppliers with the different type of customers. So during the peacetime, when different customers have different demand, they can reconfigure the supply chain quickly to produce new products. So during COVID-19, they demonstrated really amazing volume and variety flexibility. And then when certain suppliers really have trouble, number one, they work with the supplier and sometimes they even talk to the government to make sure they can restart their operation. In addition to that, they also have large supplier base in their database. And when one supplier cannot work, they can easily find another supplier. So they can really solve the problem very quickly with the help of digital technology and the amazing supplier relationship. And then lastly, they can restore their operation very quickly And on top of that, they help their partners to restart supply chains to make new products. I think my time is almost up. By summary, I think through this crisis, a lot of companies will have to really think about how do they innovate in their supply chain so that they can really gain long-term competitive advantage. There are really several things you need to do. One is adopt digital technology to improve visibility. Second, use big data and AI to automate and optimize many of the supply chain processes and decisions. And thirdly, they need to enhance supplier collaboration through better management of supplier relationships and selection. And then they also need to redesign the supply chain network so that they can balance globalization versus localization. They also need to map all the process in the supply chain network. And then they also need to set up formal supply chain risk management function and make contingency plans. And lastly, they really need to follow the change in consumer demand and try to improve customer satisfaction through omni-channel supply chains. Through this crisis, I think many companies realize if you only have the offline channel, you are not really safe. In many cases, you cannot really respond to disasters. You have to set up a channel with both online and offline. With that, I have to conclude my presentation. And if you want to listen more cases from Chinese companies, we have one event in July where Haier, Jingdong, and several other famous companies will join us to discuss what they did during COVID-19. I hope more of you will be able to exchange with companies like this, and we will all learn together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We'll come to some of the questions that the audience is asking after Martin Schaefer has presented. Martin, I'm going to turn the floor to you.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much. Hopefully everybody can see my presentation. Also, thank you to the team of CEIBS to invite Kuehne Nagel today in this forum to speak to you on the changes and impact in air logistics. So today we want to focus on what has happened in air freight and why is the challenge that also Dr. Zhao presented just now impacting us in air logistics. Very briefly, as mentioned, I will be speaking on behalf of the European organization of Kuehne Nagel in charge of air logistics operations. In today's presentation, I want to talk to you about the company, very briefly who we are, but more importantly about the impact that we have in air logistics. And we want to give you some live examples how the air logistics industry is responding and supporting in the current situation with medical equipments. And we just heard about the importance of redesigning your supply chains. So we are promoting the combination of modes to reduce the dependency on one or the other capacity availability. And the other lesson learned, and we heard it just now, the digitalization and the importance that we are framing under the umbrella of e-touch, why we believe this is very important to prevent us and prepare us for the next situations. Very briefly to Kuehne Nagel, we are a company around for over 130 years. You will find us in more than 100 countries with 1,400 offices and roughly 83,000 employees. When speaking about air logistics, to give you just some fun facts for maybe an understanding, it's about 17 documents a day that we are per second that we archive. That gives you an idea about the scan of documentation we have and to live with. We heard earlier about customs requirement, airway bill packing lists, and so on and so forth. Lastly, you see that we're doing more than 1,000 charters per year. To give you an idea, due to COVID, we have managed in the first 4 months already to do more than 400 charters, which still some are ongoing. So what is the real impact on COVID in air logistics? The data we are showing you today is mainly provided by external companies. So we're using now data available through either IATA or Seabury to reflect to you what has happened during COVID-19. Overall, we have seen a drop of capacity compared to previous year of more than 28%. I will show you in separate slides what this means in regards to certain areas and the impacts we have. The main shortage of capacity was related to the reduction of passenger flights. As most of you know, we have travel restrictions. You're not permitted to leave one country traveling to another one. Therefore, these airlines have stopped operating, and that is a very crucial element of our capacity when traveling around the world. And I will show you that in a following slide. So in order to respond to the lack of capacity, we have started to reactivate freighters, as well as the airlines that used to be parked prior to the situation and been reinstated, but they're not able to fully cope with the loss of capacity. And lastly, very important, we spoke about resilience, about able to respond. You see our operations office around the world have been fully operational. This is also thanks to our IT platform, allowing our workers to work remotely and being capable to respond to customer needs at any given time without having to be present in the office. This slide is giving you a cargo capacity growth from the first week of May, so very recent still, comparing to last year. So you see the overall trend. Where you see the highest number, if we were to look at transatlantic, for example, with a 61 and 52% reduction, this is mainly related to a high dependency on passenger flights. So traditionally, we have, compared to the rest of the trade, a very small percentage of freighters. This is different than in a Trans-Pacific, where you see a lot of freighter capacity also in the past being used. So the freighters continues to fly while the passengers are on the ground, is giving you that picture, which brings the overall challenge to our supply chain. In the next slide, you will see how the capacity has shifted between the passengers and the freighters. So the orange line that you're seeing is representing the capacity used to be available with passenger flights. So pre-COVID, we had close to 100,000 tons available in the market for all of us to book on passenger flights. And in the worst situation, where you see it highlighted in yellow, the peak, we were under 20,000. So only a fifth of what used to be available was available in the market, which brought a real shock to the market because the cargo still had to move. We know about the need for medical equipment, breathing equipment, and so on that still had a high demand, and suddenly capacity was gone. Only slowly the airline capacity was able to adjust with freighters. So you see the blue line where freighter has been brought back, but it cannot make up for the loss, which I will show you in the next slide. One of the increases you see now, which circled in green, is the 10% increase previous week. So we are not only comparing to the last year, we're also looking how it has happened to previous week. And you see an increase in passenger capacity by 10%. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have 10% more flights in the air that allows passengers to travel. It is actually the conversion where airlines decided to use the passenger aircraft to transport cargo only. So the cargo hold they had already used in the past is now fully optimized with cargo. And in addition, they have started loading boxes onto the seats inside the plane. Some airlines even took the seats out. You may have seen some of these pictures posted in the internet. We have to be careful not preventing a wrong picture that this is solving the issue, because the passenger flights conversions is still restricted through the cargo doors, the passenger doors. When you enter the plane, this is the maximum dimension we have available in order to get cargo inside. Hence, boxes is a limitation. So the real optimization that we have with a freighter, where you have a big cargo door and you can have pre-built units moved, we don't have with the passengers. Here, a snapshot on the April data of airline grounded their planes. You'll see in the blue box, referring to the narrow body, very simple explanation. What we use in our terminology is the wide body and a narrow body. The narrow body is an airplane with a single aisle. Most of you have traveled on those before, predominantly used in short haul. And then you have the wide body, where you have a minimum of 2 aisles, and you have the application predominantly for the long haul. You see a lot of the narrow bodies was grounded, which caused not as much as an impact to us as the wide bodies, because those are the ones we're using for transporting our cargo. In this slide, I wanted to illustrate the capacity development. And it gives you a bit of an understanding from historical development, where we came from in 2019. In 2019, you can see already the reduction of capacity in the freighters, but the passengers were quite stable. And only after COVID started, the impact, you see the reduction of the capacity of 28%, falling by another 9%. And again, the drop of the passenger being so significant with hardly any planes still flying, that we had restrictions or a limitation in moving our cargo across the globe. This indication, provided again by Cass and Zeberry, is giving you an illustration of how the overall market is developing. And very interesting, of course, towards the end of this graph, the closest period to today, you see the sharp development, very historical. You see a huge drop in capacity, significant as we've never seen it before. And as a result, tonnage reduced. Still, there was cargo that had to be flown. And for those, a lot of extraordinary cases had to be planned for. So our adjustment to the need in the market. So we talk about freighters, charters, where either customers or freight forwarders like us went into contract with an airline or an operator to rent the whole aircraft to fly cargo, which I will show you in the following slide. Here, it just tells you the typical economical development, capacity dropping at a higher rate than the tonnage, which was leading to an increase in rate. And a significant increase in rate was because there wasn't capacity available to book, and we had to buy the whole plane instead of just an allocation on the plane itself. To use an example of COVID-19, here's an example of a shipment moving from China to Germany. The requirement for us was to move over 7,000 cartons of health equipment from China. We chartered one of the largest aircrafts in the world, the Antonov 225, which we loaded in China, in Tianjin, to get ready to fly into Leipzig, Germany. The aircraft had a very short turnaround time. The challenge you have here, and you may not always understand the dimension, here the challenge is that if a crew is grounded for too long of a period, they will be put on quarantine because of COVID-19. So we had to make sure we receive the plane, refuel it, load it in such a short time window that the aircraft can depart with the same crew and not being forced to an additional layover. That way, the freight was able to move in a short timeline, departing at 1 p.m. local time and arriving the next day, 10 in the morning, where the aircraft was unloaded and then put into a distribution center to supply hospitals, as well as a doctor's office with the required equipment. As Dr. Zhao mentioned, or Professor Zhao mentioned, what is it we have to do now to prepare ourselves? And we're currently, you saw it in the previous slide, dealing with a big capacity change. We are not having as much access to the capacity as we used to have. So we have to be agile in the market, understanding what options do we have to address the needs of our customers. So the next example is showing you innovative solutions, how to deal with the situations. So when we see capacity constraints out of Asia into Europe, for example, are happening, we are considering a combination of our modes. So we're using sea freight to bring the cargo out of the air freight, out of the Asian market into a media, here in this case Dubai, out of which we then would fly the cargo into the destinations, being in Africa, Europe, or North America. You see, not only do you have a benefit of the capacity constraints adjustment that we needed, but you also have a quicker transit than if you were to use sea freight all the way, on average 50%. You're also cheaper than the usual air freight mode because you're combining a sea freight leg with an air freight leg, and, which was a very important target for Kuehne Nagel, reduce the CO2 emission, which in the case of a sea air transportation is a 50% reduction compared to an air freight mode. So overall, the capacity is more flexible, so we can consider other exit points if needed, and we can avoid the bottleneck of being congested in one environment, in this case, Asia, for example. Now, with the module being quite successful, the expansion is now happening in another origin, Los Angeles, in order to further utilize the ability of combining different modes to achieve a customer need. Lastly, I want to speak to you about how do we prepare ourselves for the future. And we heard about the challenge of dealing with big data. So for us, it's very important that we want to increase the share of our engagement through electronic channels. We refer to this as e-touch. E-touch is very elemental to us. It means an order has been received from a customer via one of the electronic mechanisms available to us. And it would allow us to not manually interfere or having to start the order from the beginning. Already today, 1/3 of our shipments in Europe are created via a digital channel. So we have either the opportunity to have an electronic exchange directly with the customer through EDI. We can either read the documents via a robot. We can also convert emails into quotations, and we can use APIs with our suppliers to get interactive into their pricing model and the booking. So hopefully this has helped you to understand how we have dealt with the crisis. I want to say thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak on the topic. Very interesting to hear your questions and happy to serve for any other questions there may be. So Robert, back to you.
Martin, thank you so much. I'm going to hand the mic, as we say, directly over to Sally. Sally, I'd like to hear just 2 or 3 minutes of insights, reflections, reactions from you to both of the inputs that you've just heard. Sally?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Perfect. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah. So I should maybe give a brief comment of the overall context and background. Basically, we started off for our companies for Europe, China, cross-border business matchmaking investment, and use a lot of big data. And at the time of outbreak of coronavirus, when it has the outbreak from China, Hubei province, we were searching with the big data to see which are the qualified suppliers of personal protection equipment for the supply to China for the firefighting situation. And then for now, when the outbreak was in Europe, we are searching for the supplies, trying to establish the qualified supply chains to alleviate the pressure from Europe side, especially hospitals. That's why we are supporting with the hospitals procurement for the Swiss hospitals, and then governments and Red Cross to get the masks and then surgical gowns, etc., to help to alleviate pressure from that. And it's extremely challenging because the different challenges from the China side and the Europe side is it's two different style, because in Europe side is primarily like where is the availability, where are the manufacturers, and what are the existing stocks, and what's the lead time, etc., and how can I deliver it back to China. Well, supporting Europe to scout for the PPE, personal protection equipment from China to Europe, there is a huge range of suppliers, especially for those ones after this coronavirus outbreak in Hubei that stepped into the production of masks only for 2 to 3 months. So the quality issue is really the big challenge in here. Like you have so many different brands you never heard of. There are like new hands into the incremental production volumes, and nevertheless, we still need it. Otherwise, the existing volume is only maybe 1% or 5% of which is like not matching the global demand for what is needed. In that case, I mean, there are not sufficient certification, and then these are different ranges of factories, maybe coming from maybe textile businesses, or they were doing some packaging businesses, and they were doing medical supplies in the sector and transferred into the masks and the surgical gowns and all this equipment production. So how can we justify about their know-how, and then how can we trust what is on the ground? And especially, you know, there are situations when if you do not get the qualified supplier, it can be that you placed an order and it was a purely seller market back then. So therefore, you even sign a contract, you can't get the delivery in time. They keep postponing it for 1 week or 2, or even the order is big and they're not sufficient supply. They may get from other factories and do the white labeling without very tight quality control. So nevertheless, the solution we give out to the market is we consolidated the mask factories. We have to, like a vertical integration really on the ground by selecting the suppliers and then to do the process checking each and every one of the steps, and having the quality controllers on the ground to check each and every step, starting from the raw material, to make sure like that what we see is what we get. And there's no white labeling without any notification that that we are aware of. So it's really like very intensely integrated into the supply chain by quickly, the time response is very important, and flexibly buying to source them with the ranges of the melt-blown cloth of the raw material for the production, and also to have a timely delivery with the air freight to the Swiss hospitals and then the governments, as well as to other European countries like the Romania governments and also Italy, etc., to make sure that this would be there in time to help people to protect themselves instead of taking the risk of cross-infection. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thanks a lot.
Oh.
That's insightful. But, I'm also going to ask Felix Sotos. Felix has also been involved with this specific topic. Felix, any reflections, insights from you?
Yes, good afternoon, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone. My feedback is from the members of the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, the members, as well as anecdotal evidence to my own activities, as well as for my former colleagues at PwC, from which I retired a few years ago, but I still get a lot of feedback from them. So key points are the response to supply chain interruptions has impact on costs directly, as we just heard before. Be that transportation costs, as we heard from Kuehne and Nagel, on additional routes no more being available or the costs increased or being delayed. But also then the rerouting, which was addressed by the combination of sea air, will cause us problems, because then we have changes to the challenges to the country of origin, as well as the free trade agreements, because these routings have to be defined to use these double tax agreements, free trade agreements, source of origin. So being all that thrown up in the air, we have increased costs at customs because they are not coming in as free trade goods. They're coming in as via different channels. So we have additional taxes, we have additional fees, handling fees, etc. And that all are at import duties, additional logistics costs. And of course, the question is then, can these costs, additional costs, be handed over to the end customer or not? Who has to carry them? That's a contractual issue as well as it is a market issue, because if the market is not accepting it, the market collapses, the demand collapses. And as you said before by the professor before, that if the demand collapses due to higher costs, we have an overall abyss to look into it.
And a relational issue as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The second point is robustness of supply chain. It will demand geographical diversification. One thing is to adding up inventory along every kind of a storage point or sink point along the supply chain, but also diversification of supply manufacturing locations. That means we have a potential capex costs, which we have not seen before. That reduces certainly profit margin and scale effects going forward and impacts all the business plans which have drawn up in 2019's earlier. All 3 R's, which you have heard before, responsiveness, resilience, restoration, have an impact on working capital. The increase due to higher inventory costs come along the value chain. Longer transportation costs, etc., impact companies' liquidity and requires in some instances bridge financing. I have seen customers or members of ours who have been looking for bridge financing, that can you bring me a financer, someone who can finance my credit which I need, because if I go by train, I need 3 times the capital cost or kind of the working capital along the line than with air freight. So who is doing that? Is the bank stepping in or not? Who is doing? These are questions which we had of the supply chain, and these questions will not go away. They will stay because we need to implement the 3 R's. Robert, back to you.
Felix, thanks a lot. I like that. I also had written down during professor's inputs, if Martin and Professor Zhao, if you could turn on your mics and your video and join us here. I'd like to ask a few questions. We have very many questions from the audience. Some of these we're going to be able to entertain, not all of them. Typically what we do is we send these out afterwards to, particularly to you, Martin and Professor Zhao, and ask you to answer some of these if you would in writing, so that we can answer all of the questions, the pertinent questions from the participants. I have a couple questions that came through. One is, Professor, you mentioned the words allocation and rationing, and then the 3 R's. You know, we watched globally a very irrational behavior of hoarding you know, this people buying toilet paper and water and food like it was the end of the earth. And yet we've got companies like Kuehne and Nagel that are extremely efficient and organized in this supply chain. It's about the optimization of delivery on supply and demand. How do we bring the rational and the irrational together in the moment of a crisis?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. I think most people know the words bullwhip effect. And when there is a perceived shortage, everybody enlarge their order. They also want to increase their inventory so that in the end, one layer at a time, the demand distortion will become bigger and bigger.
Yep.
And actually, from the company or the government's perspective, if you have the detailed information system, so that you will be able to know the true demand. Actually, sometimes, let's say the hospital wants these orders, but you know how many cases are there, how many nurses, how many doctors are there. You use your data, you can predict the demand better than the hospital. And then you can tell the hospital, don't order this much. We know you have demand, we'll take care of you. And we also know where the supply. So the rationing and allocation and also the whole optimization in the supply chain based on data and visibility. Great. And when you have companies who can really tie these different parts of the supply chain together, they bring in the digital system, they have the data, they can analyze, then that helps really resolve some of these issues. But of course, sometimes it also takes persuasion to change people's behavior.
Yes. I'll ask you directly a follow-up question, both to Martin and Professor Zhao. And this was the very first question that came in from a participant. Very quickly, Mr. Hans-Joachim Fuchs asked the question, how do we forecast this demand? What are the methods that you use to do this? It's there's a real science here. It's not just guessing, you know?
That's actually, there are really two approaches of making the demand forecast. One is historical. In the normal time, when you have normal demand pattern, you will be able to use what happened in the past to predict the future. But all of a sudden, you have outbursts of this virus. You can still kind of learn from past experience, maybe like SARS, but it's not exactly the same. So that means you will have to be really creative in collecting different sources of data. So you need to look at how many patients are in each hospital, how many nurses and doctors are working over there, and what is the number of increase of cases in certain city, in certain province, or certain district. And you need to have people who can innovatively collect alternative sources of data and do the innovative type of analysis to help you to predict rather than using the old time series model.
Great. Okay, thank you. We might ask you for some more data, some more information on this process offline to give a little bit more elucidation. We have a question from Richard Francis from Swiss Re. We're partnering with on some other things. I'll simplify the question. Was credit a factor? As Felix was talking about the liquidity issues a little bit. Tell us a little bit about this on the liquidity and credit, especially on the way forward. You know, we saw so many companies end up on the short end of the stick of just not having the liquidity and how the credit situations, particularly in China, to eradicate the supply chain pressures?
I think that's a very challenging question. And many of the small, medium-sized companies are facing a lot of difficulty with liquidity, especially restaurants. Before the Chinese New Year, they predict there will be a very high demand during the Chinese New Year. So they bought raw material, put that into the store. They also try to pay double or triple of their workers' salary to keep them in the store. But then when the Chinese New Year comes, people cannot come to the restaurant. So they pay the salary, they pay the raw material, but then they have really no revenue. So many of these companies are really short on their cash flow, but luckily the Chinese government really acted very fast. And they asked the bank to give the small, medium-sized companies loans based on some of the owner's personal collaterals. And some of the city even say the city will pay the loan interest. So this is one side. And then another side is large companies like Haier. I know during this crisis, they worked very hard with multiple banks. Many of them are international banks. They created the collaboration between the bank and the core enterprise to really design the network-based supply chain financing system to offer finance to their suppliers and distributors.
Great.
So there's a lot of innovations going on.
Yeah.
I mean, in our case, for example, when you look at air logistics, when moving with the personal protection equipment, a lot of the support came also from governments, right? So when there were equipments moved, the governments were also supporting. We had very close engagement with government organizations and also with support structures of the UN, for example, UNICEF and so on. But nevertheless, it's also a matter of partnership. We have had dealings with companies for many years. Again, we're around for more than 130. So partnership is also something we value. Our customer centricity is important. And we need to ensure that the supply chain is uptaken in even for products that may not be only for the equipment of health, but it's also to support our customers through these challenging times. That's when you build the relationship also for the future.
Thanks. Martin, I'm going to give a follow-up question to you particularly because you had some very interesting slides about the dynamism that took place between the way that things were getting places and hybrid models. Dorothea Becker asked the question, how easy or how difficult was it to retrain the air freight operators and to do the switch? You know, this is, and how did you guys able to do this? I mean, the capacity isn't just waiting around for Kuehne and Nagel. So two factors to that. How do you do that? And then how could you do that, you know?
Exactly. The one part is very beneficial is that we have the same operating tool for both sea and air logistics. So our users are are trained to work in both environments. It's very similar. So adjusting our manpower towards sea or air is very similar in the way we execute. Secondly, is that this product was always around, but now it became a much higher attention, and we were able to shift more volumes through than we had in the past. So we were able to then utilize the capacity of the sea freight to complement the lack of air freight in that element. And the people were then able to readjust and then move, instead of the traditional air freight all the way, move a sea freight leg in between and then have an air freight to the end. So the transition was actually quite smooth. We had the tools available. We had to just open the drawer and then use it to a bigger scale.
Yeah, let me add on a few comments on this innovative practice. Actually, I see many companies like Martin's company are really forced to innovate during this crisis. But then after they innovated, they start to realize all these things can be done. And actually, even during the normal time, we should done it. We should do it. Yeah.
So that's something, you know, as a professor of this topic, and Martin, you as an expert being really in this space for 17 years, if you look out to 2025, what are you going to tell your younger colleagues or your students? What were the big lessons that we learned that changed, that moved the needle? You know, what are the needle moving factors here for us going forward?
Yeah, I see number one, more and more companies will really invest in digitization. So COVID-19 really accelerated the digital transformation. That's number one. And then number two, the old supply chain had a lot of waste. And many of the times we had multiple layers in the supply chain. And during COVID-19, due to the need to be able to be more responsive, respond faster, more accurately, a lot of companies figure out a way, can I get the product directly from the factory to the final user? So there will be more innovation that way too. I see these two trends.
So digitization and optimization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dramatically improving and shorten the process through digitization and also through the change in the way we work in the supply chain network.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We're 5 minutes over time. I would like to ask Felix, as you've been directly involved with some of this also, any insights here that you're picking up on as well? You're on mute.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Actually, I have nothing to add to what just has been said before, because we are all in this learning phase together, and it is very hard to make a prediction. But what I was predicted 4 weeks ago would never be valid today. So what Martin is saying, was Professor Zhao is saying, we have to really being very responsive, dynamic, and listen to it. This bridge financing was not on my radar, and no one of our radars, because that was something, because they had to do new things. And when we went to the bank with that, the bank said, but you have never been active in that. How, what is the data you can give to me? And they couldn't answer to the bank. And because there was already so much collateral linked to other needs for credit, there was no more room for that. So what Professor Zhao said is, yes, the government help, but everything that is cross-border, everything is new, everyone is saying it's a high risk. So in that regard, we have to learn together and listen to each other. And I believe what Martin has is a company who is more than 100 years in that industry. They have a trust build up. I think it comes to the trust you have with your supplier and with your clients. And that trust is now stretched and is tested. And the one who have this trust tested and relied, that's the one who can survive going forward.
That's a little bit what Sally was mentioning indirectly, the word trust. I'd like to ask Martin for a last comment, and then Professor Zhao for the final comment.
Yeah, and I can only, one of the learnings we took out of COVID is that is actually underlining our strategy we have currently ongoing, which is really the e-touch, so the electronic exchange with our customers, and to have a customer-centric. So we need to be flexible enough for customer desires to adjust. And the e-touch to us is even so important. You can see us all having to work remotely and being able to respond to customer needs. If we wouldn't have that IT infrastructure in place, and we would have reliant on being in an office and having a fax machine or a document producing locally, we wouldn't have been able to sustain it. I think it's underlining the importance and dealing with this, which we have done very, very well. And the second part is really that mindset of the people, right? We joked about this in the preparation, the Zoom mindset, right? We're doing everything in Zoom when we used to have the phone calls and the meetings. And I think it shows to us that this ability to work in this virtual environment and to address these needs will be something in 2025 that is most likely normal to us by then.
Okay, great. Thank you. Professor, the final word I give to you.
Okay. I think Felix mentioned a very important perspective, which is cost versus responsiveness, resilience. And sometimes you do find responsiveness, resilience may cost a little money here and there. But my perspective is if you do that right with innovative thinking, creative relationship, plus the latest technology, you can figure out a way to be responsive, resilient, but not at that much cost. And due to time limitation, I cannot really give you more cases, but we've been studying Hire's digital platform, Cosmoplex, in my opinion, is one of the successful approach which helped Hire in the peacetime before this COVID-19. During the COVID-19, it turned out to be very successful too, but not too many companies are investing in that type of systems. And I hope through COVID-19, this is kind of like wake-up call. We will be able to be more innovative use more technology, create more innovative partnerships, we will be able to have better solutions. So I'm very confident.
Thank you. Dear Professor, dear Martin, Felix, Sally, thank you all very much for joining. All the participants also, we had about 150 people online at the high point. As usual, we make a recording of this. It will be put on YouTube. We will send it to everyone, the link, and we'll also put it on our homepage. We typically send a revised version of the slides from both Martin as well as Professor Zhao, and we'll send those to you as well. And we would ask the two lead speakers today, we're going to send you the questions that we weren't able to answer online today, just out of time reasons. And maybe you can answer some of those, and we would include those into the package that we send all the participants. So finally, I'd say, dear participants, again, thank you for your time and your interest and learning with us together on these topics. It's learning with us, not only from us. That's the main thing we like to encourage. Thank you to Martin, Kuehne, and Nagel. Thank you, Felix, with the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce for being a partner with this. Professor, Sally, thank you all very much. Wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.